The courtroom was already tense before the judge even entered. Reporters leaned forward, pens idle, as if the air itself whispered of something unnatural about to unfold. Diddy, seated calmly at the defense table in a navy blue suit with no tie, barely blinked. He had been here for weeks now, stoic, composed, untouched. The man who once ruled studios with just a glance now sat beneath fluorescent lights in the shadows of federal prosecution. But it wasn't the prosecution's statement or the witness on the stand that cracked open the fabric of the trial that morning. It was a glance. Just one. Juror number 4, a woman known for her quiet composure and methodical note-taking, turned her head for a moment, no more than 2 seconds, and locked eyes with someone sitting in the public gallery. The shift was slight, but to the trained eyes of courtroom regulars, it was a thunderclap. Her gaze didn't sweep the room. It didn't wander. It went straight to one man. LeBron James. He was seated in the second row, dressed immaculately in a dark, tailored suit, glasses perched on his nose, his posture still, almost statuesque. Most assumed he was there in solidarity, perhaps offering moral support to Diddy as an old friend or mentor. His presence, while curious, had not been questioned. Until now. Because that glance changed everything. It wasn't just that juror number 4 looked at him. It was how she looked. Like she was looking for reassurance, like she already knew him, like something had passed between them before this trial ever started. A murmur spread through the room, soft at first, like wind in dry leaves, but it grew, swelling until even the stenographer paused mid-keystroke. The judge hadn't entered yet, but the energy shifted so radically it was as if a storm had blown the doors open. Then, from somewhere behind the prosecutor's bench, a whisper cut through the air. "He's coaching the jury." And the phrase wasn't shouted, it wasn't even said with volume, but the courtroom swallowed it whole and choked on it. The bailiff's eyes widened. One of the defense attorneys stood up, only to sit right back down. And in the gallery, LeBron didn't flinch. He just sat there, breathing evenly, his hands folded in his lap. But everyone noticed how he stopped looking at the jurors, how he fixed his gaze downward. The judge entered seconds later, took one step toward the bench and stopped. He had felt it too, the shift, the weight. He hadn't even sat down when the prosecutor raised his hand and requested an emergency sidebar. That alone wasn't uncommon. But the reason was jury interference. The courtroom exploded, not in volume, but in collective intake. The judge called for an immediate recess. Jurors were escorted out, some looking confused, others already shaken. Juror 4 didn't say a word, but she didn't make eye contact with anyone as she left. The rest of the gallery remained frozen. LeBron stayed seated. 2 bailiffs moved closer, not threatening, but clearly instructed to maintain proximity. Diddy turned his head for the first time since the recess was called and looked straight at LeBron just once, and then looked away. He didn't need to say anything. His face said it all. This wasn't planned. Like this. Behind the scenes, legal teams scrambled. The prosecution pushed for access to courtroom surveillance and hallway camera footage. The defense tried to argue that there was no proof of any interaction, no concrete evidence of wrongdoing. But then a courthouse security officer came forward. During a break 2 days earlier, he had seen LeBron seated in the cafeteria wearing a hat pulled low, sharing coffee with a woman he recognized only later as juror number 6. They weren't whispering, they weren't hiding, but they were alone. The officer hadn't reported it at the time. Why would he? LeBron James wasn't under any legal restriction. He was a visitor, a citizen. But now that image haunted him. And that memory took on an entirely new shape when whispers began echoing through the courtroom like ghosts. That maybe this wasn't the first time. That maybe more jurors had been approached. That maybe the trial wasn't clean. Within hours, more murmurs turned into statements. One anonymous court clerk claimed to have seen juror number 2 exit in the same parking garage where LeBron's driver regularly waited. Another assistant said juror number 6 had been seen crossing the street, pausing mid-traffic to exchange words with a tall man in a suit that looked suspiciously like the one LeBron had worn just the day before. Still, no solid proof, no footage, no audio, until something physical arrived. A handwritten note, left anonymously in the clerk's inbox, barely folded, as if written in haste or panic. No signature, no fingerprints, just one chilling message. He told us to lean toward a mistrial. He said Diddy won't survive a guilty verdict, and neither will the culture. The courtroom transformed. Suddenly, every piece of this trial was infected with suspicion. What had once been about racketeering, financial misconduct, and a hidden vault full of secrets was now being devoured by the presence of someone who wasn't even on trial. LeBron. The judge called a private conference. No cameras, no press, just key figures. Legal protocols were reviewed, emergency motions drafted. And then the first domino fell. Juror number 6, the same woman from the cafeteria, requested to speak privately with the judge. Her voice trembled. Her face was pale. And while she wouldn't confirm the note was hers, she admitted that yes, she had spoken to a public figure during the trial. She wouldn't name him. She wouldn't describe the interaction in detail. But she said she felt the pressure not overt, not demanded, but a weight she couldn't ignore. Something about the trial being bigger than the courtroom. About how verdicts don't just impact men, they impact movements. The judge removed his glasses. He leaned back. And then he said what no one expected. "This court," he whispered, "is dangerously close to collapsing under the weight of external manipulation." And the room, once electric with chaos, fell into a silence so complete it was terrifying. Reporters didn't scribble. Attorneys didn't breathe. And in the second row, LeBron still didn't move. But when the judge looked toward him, he looked back. Just once. Just for a second. And that second was enough to launch an inquiry that would shake the foundation of the trial. That would turn Diddy Combs' already high-profile case into a national legal spectacle. That would raise questions about what happens when a courtroom, a place built on rules and order, is touched by something as powerful and intangible as fame. The judge called for all jurors to be privately interviewed. Security footage was reviewed frame by frame. Communications from courthouse staff were frozen, archived, copied for review. Phone logs were quietly subpoenaed. And LeBron James, the man once known for clutch free throws and global philanthropy, found himself at the center of something neither basketball nor press conferences could help him escape. Not a scandal, a federal suspicion. As the sun set behind the courthouse, casting long golden rays through the narrow windows, Diddy Comb remained in his seat long after proceedings ended. His lawyers whispered to him, urging him to move, to leave, but he didn't. He just sat there, staring at the now empty jury box, at the seats that no longer held citizens, but secrets. The trial wasn't over. Not yet. But justice had already begun to wobble. And in the background, behind thick courtroom walls, a new question began to echo louder than any verdict ever could. What happens when the most powerful man in the room isn't the judge? The morning after the courtroom froze was colder than it should have been. Not in temperature, but in mood. The federal building, usually humming with the low vibration of motion and duty, felt like a vault sealed with uncertainty. No one spoke loudly. No one laughed in the hallway. Even the guards scanning ID badges did so with fewer words and more glances. Inside the judge's chambers, a war room had been quietly assembled. Legal aides moved like ghosts between stacks of evidence while a wall of monitors replayed every second of surveillance footage from the past 2 weeks. The judge, still in civilian clothes, hadn't spoken in an hour. He just stared at one freeze frame on the center screen. LeBron James seated in the cafeteria, leaning slightly forward, juror number 6 halfway through a sip of coffee, her eyes fixed on his face. There was no audio. There didn't need to be. The posture told the story. Proximity, intention, presence. It all bled from that still image like an accusation. Then came the next shock. A member of courthouse IT walked into chambers holding a flash drive, his face pale. It contained logs from the courthouse Wi-Fi routers. Most phones that connected had registered under normal traffic. Courthouse staff, reporters, security. But one phone stood out. It had no identifiable user. Just a MAC address that pinged the router multiple times but never accessed any courthouse apps. It stayed silent, anonymous, ghostly. But the router data matched a burner phone purchased at a Beverly Hills electronics shop 4 days after the trial began. Cash transaction. No name, no trace. Surveillance from the shop was reviewed. It was LeBron's driver. The discovery cracked open a new level of panic. Because now it wasn't just speculation. Now it was infrastructure. A direct connection, however thin, between someone close to LeBron and an untraceable device that had operated inside the courthouse. When the data team ran reverse logs, they found another match. Juror number 2's phone had received over a dozen missed calls in short bursts, none lasting longer than 30 seconds from that same burner number. The timestamps were damning. Late evening hours, always after court recess, never during work hours, never on record. It was a digital whisper campaign, and now it was evidence. The defense scrambled to contain it. They filed objections before the judge even re-entered the courtroom. They claimed the phone data was circumstantial, the video blurry, the note anonymous and unverifiable. But it was too late. The court had already ordered a full jury integrity review. Each juror was brought in one at a time. Private sessions. No press. No public gallery. When juror number 2 sat across from the judge, he was visibly shaking. A court deputy stood in the corner of the room, a federal agent beside him. "Have you communicated with anyone connected to this case outside of court?" the judge asked, voice calm, almost gentle. "I didn't think it mattered if I didn't tell the others," the juror said quietly. "Someone told me to keep it private." "Who?" the judge asked. "Did someone suggest what your vote should be?" A long pause. Then, "They said Diddy's life depends on it. They said the verdict was bigger than the evidence." The judge exhaled slowly and turned toward the wall. "Do you understand what that means?" he asked without turning back. "Yes," the juror whispered. "Do you know who they is?" Another pause, then a nod. But no name was given. Still, the implications were already too heavy. The judge returned to the bench with a face carved in stone. His first words were not to the attorneys but to the bailiffs. "Clear the gallery." Murmurs sparked like static before a thunderstorm, but no one disobeyed. Reporters filed out in silent rows. Legal teams stood, uncertain. Only the jurors remained seated, unmoved, but visibly unsettled. Then came the second order. I am issuing a subpoena for Mr. LeBron James to appear before this court for direct questioning regarding contact with jury members. The room didn't erupt. It collapsed into silence. The defense objected, calling the subpoena sensationalist and inflammatory. The prosecution responded with a simple sentence: "Your Honor, the integrity of the entire trial has been compromised." And that was the end of it. Court was adjourned until LeBron could be brought in. That night, outside the courthouse, protesters gathered in two waves. One side carried signs that read, "No one above the law," and "Protect the process." And the other held placards with LeBron's face over the words "Voice of the People" and "He fights for us." National media descended like a storm. Hashtags exploded. Legal experts argued into cameras while internet conspiracy theories lit up every corner of social media. But inside the courtroom, none of that mattered, because the real battlefield wasn't out there. It was in the minds of the jurors. When they returned the next morning under federal escort, the change was obvious. Juror number 6 no longer made eye contact with anyone. Juror number 2 kept his hands folded tightly in his lap, refusing to look left or right. Juror number 4 glanced only once toward the public gallery and saw what wasn't there. LeBron James had not returned to his seat. The judge opened the session with no greeting, no gavel, just a sentence. "This court has received credible evidence suggesting that members of this jury have been subject to external influence." A breath held across the room. "Therefore, this court is now entering a phase of internal inquiry. We are no longer deliberating Diddy Combs' guilt or innocence. We are deliberating whether this trial still stands." The words were surgical, and with them the entire proceeding mutated. Evidence was put on hold. Testimonies paused. Instead, the focus shifted to surveillance footage, to call records, to statements from courthouse staff. That's when the envelope arrived. Sealed. No return address. Marked only with the initials CS. Inside, printed transcripts of conversations from the courthouse lobby, recorded unintentionally by a malfunctioning audio monitoring system designed to detect loud disturbances. Most of the recordings were useless background noise, garbled footsteps. But one snippet was clear enough to transcribe, a voice deep and unmistakable saying, "Just don't push the vote. Let it stall. That's all we need." And the timestamp placed the moment squarely on the afternoon of LeBron's last confirmed visit to the courthouse. The judge leaned back, rubbed his temple, and requested one thing: bring LeBron in. Not for speculation, not for headlines, but for sworn testimony. The subpoena was enforced within hours. That evening, in a black SUV flanked by two unmarked government sedans, LeBron James entered the building through a back entrance. No cameras, no entourage, just silence. When he walked into the courtroom the next morning, the energy wasn't electric. It was surgical. Every person in the room had seen him as a hero once, but today he wasn't here to inspire. He was here to explain. The clerk stood. "Please raise your right hand." He did. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," LeBron said, voice low. He sat, and the court held its breath. The prosecutor began without ceremony. "You have attended this trial on multiple days. Is that correct?" "Yes," LeBron replied. On those days, were you in contact with any members of the jury? I greeted some people outside the building, he said carefully. I didn't initiate anything inside. Did you speak to juror number 6 in the cafeteria? LeBron hesitated. Yes, briefly, but we didn't talk about the case. Did you advise her on how to vote? No, he said quickly. Absolutely not. Then the first clip was shown. 40 seconds of muted video, the two seated, leaning forward, speaking closely. LeBron glanced at the screen. I don't remember what I said. You don't remember what you said to a federal juror during an active trial? I talked to a lot of people, he answered. It wasn't about the trial. But it was during the trial. Silence. Then the phone logs were brought up, the burner number, the timing, the connection to his driver. LeBron's attorney objected, claiming there was no proof LeBron used the phone. The judge allowed the evidence, noting that at this stage they were not deciding guilt, but exposure. Did you instruct anyone directly or indirectly to influence this jury? No. But the denial sounded hollow, not because of tone, but because of everything surrounding it. The silence, the presence, the power. The judge leaned forward. This court will not be hijacked by influence, not by media, not by celebrities, not even by legends. If you spoke a word that made any juror question their independence, then you have already altered the course of justice. LeBron said nothing. He just looked at his hands. When the judge dismissed him, he stood, bowed his head slightly, and walked out the way he came in. Not as a hero, not even as an accused man, but as the reason everything had changed. Outside the courtroom, a storm of press surged forward. But inside, the silence lingered. A silence not of respect, but of dread. Because now it was no longer about Diddy. It was about whether justice had ever stood a chance. The morning sun filtered in through the thin blinds of the judge's chambers, slicing the air into lines of gold and gray, but it brought no warmth. The judge hadn't slept. The legal aides hadn't left. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, untouched. The walls were closing in, not because of guilt or innocence, but because of something far more corrosive: doubt, the kind that seeps into the seams of a courtroom and weakens the structure from within. On the desk before him sat 3 phones, each belonging to a different juror, each now under federal review. The digital forensic team had worked through the night, parsing every call, every message, every ping. And now they had something. A message, short and blunt, from a secondary number linked to LeBron's assistant. Sent during deliberation week, it read, "They're leaning not guilty. Keep the energy on them. LeBron's got it." It wasn't addressed to a juror. It wasn't proof in the traditional sense. But it was context, it was proximity, and it was enough. The judge stepped out of chambers and re-entered the courtroom without warning. No announcement, no preamble, just the sound of his footsteps against the tile, sharp and deliberate. Every head turned. The reporters, those who had secured the few remaining seats in the gallery, sat upright. The defense stood quickly, as if expecting a ruling. But the judge didn't look at them. He looked straight at juror number 6. "Stand," he said. She did, slowly, like a person rising in church with a confession burning her tongue. "Do you have something to say to this court?" he asked. Her voice trembled. I was approached." "By whom?" he asked. She didn't answer. "Was it the man we just subpoenaed yesterday?" She nodded. "Did he speak to you about the verdict?" "He said—" She paused, swallowed hard. "He said the trial was bigger than one man, that a guilty verdict would hurt more than just Diddy." The judge's jaw tightened. "Did you feel that statement influenced your thinking?" "I tried not to let it, but it stayed with me." Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want to disappoint him." The courtroom didn't gasp. It didn't move. It froze in collective disbelief. The weight of her words wasn't in their volume, but in their implication. A juror had admitted, under oath, that the presence and words of a cultural icon had shaped her lens, even unintentionally. It wasn't bribery. It wasn't overt coercion. But it was poison. The judge dismissed her from the jury immediately. The defense exploded, claiming this tainted the entire process. The prosecution fired back that it validated their motion. The courtroom, now more battlefield than bench, descended into legal warfare. But the judge wasn't done. He turned to the rest of the jurors and said, "If any of you feel you can no longer assess this case on its merits alone, stand now and declare it." Silence, then the creak of a chair. Juror number 2 stood. "I don't know what's real anymore," he said. "I don't know what's mine and what's been fed to me." He sat back down, but the damage was irreversible. The judge leaned back in his chair, looked up at the ceiling as if searching for divine clarity, and then delivered a decision no one had prepared for. "We are no longer in trial. We are now in inquiry." He paused. "An evidentiary hearing will commence immediately to determine whether this courtroom has been contaminated beyond repair. Mr. James will return, this time not just for questions, for accountability." When LeBron re-entered the building, there were no cheers, no protests, no chants, just the sharp echo of his footsteps down the hallway, flanked by 2 federal marshals, not as a suspect, not yet, but as someone whose presence had triggered a collapse. He sat at the witness table, again raising his hand, again swearing to tell the truth. But this time, there was no defense team to interrupt, no lawyers shielding him. The judge had suspended standard procedures. This wasn't a cross-examination. This was a reckoning. "Mr. James," the judge said, "do you understand that your words, your actions, your very presence in this courtroom may have altered the outcome of a federal trial?" LeBron's jaw clenched. "I understand." "Do you deny speaking to a juror about the implications of a guilty verdict?" "I don't remember saying it that way," he replied. "But if I did, I didn't mean it as pressure." And yet, it was received as such. The judge's voice was a blade. "You may not have intended to tilt the scale, but your weight was felt." Then came the second revelation. The prosecution presented a printed screenshot of a message sent by LeBron's assistant to a group chat, confirming jury sentiment and referencing LeBron's conversations outside the courthouse. The assistant, now under federal watch, had admitted to sending it, claiming it was just updates for optics. But optics were now evidence. The judge stared at the paper, then at LeBron. "This court exists on one principle above all neutrality. Your actions, whether out of friendship, loyalty, or hubris, have cracked that foundation." LeBron's voice was quieter now. "I didn't mean to harm the process." "And yet you did," the judge said. "Intention does not absolve impact." The courtroom remained still. No one moved. No one blinked. And then the judge turned toward Diddy. The defendant hadn't spoken in days. His eyes had grown tired. His posture slouched slightly. The edge he carried when this all began had dulled. "Diddy," the judge said, "do you have anything to say about your associate's involvement?" Diddy shook his head slowly. "He thought he was helping," he said. "But he wasn't sent here for me. He sent himself." The judge nodded. That may be true, but the result is the same. Then he looked out across the courtroom at the jury box that now held only echoes and failures. This case, this court, this process has been compromised. We are on the brink of a mistrial not because of evidence, not because of witnesses, but because of presence, because influence sat in that gallery and stretched its hand too far. He ordered all jurors released under federal protection, pending individual reviews. The trial itself was now suspended, not dismissed, not retried, frozen in a state of judicial paralysis. Outside, news vans lined the street. Inside, the courtroom emptied slowly, like the aftermath of a funeral. But Diddy stayed, alone, seated, still looking at the jury box, at the place where the verdict was supposed to live, where truth was supposed to emerge, where, instead, silence had won. He didn't speak when his lawyers asked him to leave. He didn't respond when the bailiff gently urged him to stand. He simply sat, watching the empty chairs like a man trying to remember what justice used to look like. LeBron James left the courthouse the way he had entered, in silence, head down, no camera flashes, no reporters shouting questions, just the echo of his steps and the knowledge that something sacred had broken and might never be whole again. Behind him, the judge returned to chambers and began drafting the one document no federal judge wants to write a ruling of compromised trial due to extrajudicial influence. It wouldn't just go on record, it would go in history. Outside the courthouse, the sky had turned the color of steel. There was no rain, not yet, but the wind carried the same tension that now lived inside the federal building. Protesters had returned, not to support a verdict, not even to defend a man, but to take sides in something far more volatile, what justice means when power walks freely through its halls. Some held signs defending LeBron James, others demanding his arrest, and a growing few simply stood in silence, holding blank posters as if the absence of words was its own indictment. Inside, the courtroom no longer resembled a chamber of law. It was now a forensic lab for moral collapse. With the trial suspended and the jury disbanded, the entire proceeding had shifted focus. The only question now was whether the trial ever had a chance of being fair. At the center of that storm sat the judge, flanked by the remaining clerks and federal investigators, who now functioned as both historians and surgeons, peeling back the layers of every interaction that had tainted the past several weeks. The evidentiary hearing had begun not with opening statements, but with the replay of every surveillance clip, phone record, cafeteria encounter, and text message that had created the shadow dragging across the room. This wasn't a trial. This was an autopsy. LeBron James sat on the witness bench again, this time without the buffer of public disbelief. The initial awe, the hesitation to question someone of his stature, had dissolved completely. Now, every question was surgical, impersonal, almost clinical. "Mr. James," the prosecutor began, "you stated previously that your contact with juror number 6 was accidental. Is that still your final position under oath?" "Yes," LeBron answered, more quietly than before. "And yet we have footage of you seated with her in a one-on-one context for over 38 seconds. She listened. You leaned in. Still accidental?" A pause. "It was casual. I didn't intend for it to be more than that." "She confessed, Mr. James. She admitted you told her this trial was bigger than one man, that a guilty verdict would hurt more than just the defendant. Do you deny saying that?" His hands were clasped in front of him now. "I don't remember saying that, but if I did, I didn't mean it as pressure. You are a global icon. You know how powerful your words are. Do you believe a juror could interpret those words as anything but pressure?" Silence again. Then LeBron spoke, voice thinner this time. "I didn't mean to manipulate her, but you did." The prosecutor stepped forward slowly. "Even if unintentionally, even if out of care, you crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed." The judge didn't interrupt. He didn't glance at LeBron. He simply stared at the table in front of him, fingers twitching slightly, the anonymous note from earlier still folded in half beneath a paperweight, as if even paper now required restraint. Then came the next blow. The prosecution presented a new message, this one pulled from the personal phone of LeBron's assistant. A screenshot of a text sent during jury deliberations. It read, "They're slipping toward guilty. Might need LBJ to sit again in gallery. Eye contact works." It was sent to a number labeled Tyrone Logistics. When traced, that number was linked to LeBron's longtime security consultant. LeBron's lips moved, but no words came out. The judge raised his eyes for the first time in minutes. "Do you deny knowledge of this exchange?" LeBron looked down. "I didn't write it. I didn't approve it. But it came from your team. I didn't know. You didn't stop it either." The judge's voice was no longer a voice. It was architecture. Cold, granite-like, foundational. "You don't have to sign a document to leave fingerprints on its consequences, Mr. James." And then the room changed again. Not physically, not through any sound or movement, but in gravity. The defense tried to recover. They claimed LeBron was being scapegoated for courtroom instability that created his presence. They argued that the media storm alone had made a clean trial impossible, and that no evidence directly tied LeBron to an overt instruction of jury manipulation. But no one was listening anymore. Because the focus wasn't on legality now, it was on integrity. The judge stood. "We are beyond rebuttal. We are in the aftermath." He looked to the gallery. "What happened here was not an isolated breach. It was a sustained erosion of boundaries. It was cultural gravity bending judicial steel." Then he turned to Diddy. The defendant, now smaller somehow, nodded before anything was said. "I didn't ask him to do it," Diddy said. "I didn't even know he was talking to people." The judge nodded. "That may be. But your proximity to someone who carries such weight has now dismantled your trial. And whether that weight was used with intention or not, it flattened the very concept of impartiality." He turned to the press bench, now packed beyond fire code capacity. "The public sees us. They always have. But now they see through us, and that may be the deepest injury of all." And then he delivered the decision. Not a verdict, not a sentence, a suspension. "This trial is hereby frozen indefinitely. No further action shall be taken on evidence, charges, or testimony until a federal review board has completed a full integrity audit of these proceedings." The room didn't exhale. It shrank. Reporters didn't sprint out of the building. They sat, stunned, unsure whether they had just witnessed a pause or a collapse. The judge continued. "Mr. James," he said, turning back to LeBron, "you are not under arrest, yet. But you are under federal inquiry for potential jury tampering and obstruction of justice. You may not contact any juror, attorney, or court employee involved in this case until this inquiry has closed." LeBron nodded, barely. His face was drained of the force that had once driven arenas full of people to their feet. There were no chants, no whistles, no celebration, just wait. Cold, judicial wait. Outside, the courthouse steps had filled with crowds once more, but their signs were quieter now. Their energy had shifted from protest to reflection, because something irreversible had happened. Not in verdict, but in vision. They had watched the law bend under the shadow of celebrity, and it didn't feel like justice anymore. It felt like theater with no audience instructions. As LeBron left through the rear entrance, shielded from cameras by a line of U.S. Marshals, his eyes never lifted from the ground, not because of guilt, but because of what he had become. A cautionary tale. A question mark. A man who thought his presence was harmless until it dismantled a courthouse. And inside, long after the lights dimmed and the floors were swept and the court stenographer packed up her transcripts, Diddy remained in the defendant's chair. Alone, hands clasped, eyes forward, watching the space where 12 jurors had once sat, watching the place where justice had been meant to speak, and where now only silence remained. The courthouse cafeteria was empty now, abandoned like a stage after a ruined performance. Chairs sat crooked. Forgotten coffee cups dotted the counters, and the vending machines blinked with mechanical indifference. In the far corner, the exact booth where LeBron had once leaned in to speak with juror number 6 now stood like a crime scene without tape, untouched but radioactive in memory. Upstairs, in the judge's chambers, the atmosphere was no different. What had once been a room of deliberation and dignity now resembled a bunker. A single television played news coverage on mute, where pundits debated not the evidence of the case, but the meaning of LeBron's involvement. Some called it a cultural reckoning, others a systemic failure. One anchor simply shook his head and whispered, "This is what happens when influence becomes louder than law." The judge sat at his desk, sleeves rolled, eyes heavy, as a team of federal integrity auditors filled the room. They weren't here to pass judgment. Not yet. They were here to investigate how the walls had cracked and how deep the damage ran. One by one, they examined phone records, reviewed statements, rewatched silent footage that now spoke louder than any testimony. But there was still one question the judge couldn't shake, one that pulsed in his mind long after the room had emptied. Had this trial ever truly belonged to the people, or had it always been one whisper away from collapse? Downstairs, in the courtroom itself, the gallery was sealed. No public access, no press, no flashing cameras, just a handful of officials, a court recorder, and LeBron James. He sat alone at a long table, his back to the gallery, facing forward. There were no more microphones, no lawyers. This wasn't testimony. This was exposure. A closed evidentiary hearing. No theatrics, no escape. The judge entered quietly and sat without fanfare. The federal prosecutor stood slowly, a man worn down not by fatigue, but by the weight of what was now required of him. "Mr. James," he began, "we are no longer questioning your memory. We are questioning your impact. You've stated under oath that you do not remember instructing any juror. However, we now possess a message, traced to your assistant, sent during deliberation. It reads, and I quote, 'They're leaning not guilty. Keep the energy on them. LeBron's got it.' Would you like to explain what 'got it' means?" LeBron's throat moved, but no sound came. He reached for a glass of water, took a sip, and then finally spoke. "It doesn't mean I was controlling them. It means I believed in what was right." "But you weren't supposed to believe anything at all," the prosecutor replied. "Not while sitting behind that gallery rail, not while jurors looked to you and saw a symbol instead of silence." The judge interjected. Mr. James, influence is not about intent. It's about effect. You could have whispered nothing and still bent the weight of this courtroom. That is the burden of the pedestal you chose to carry into this space." LeBron looked down. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He knew. The judge continued. "We have confirmation now from 3 jurors, each admitting to being aware of your presence, to interpreting your reactions, your silences, your glances. They looked for meaning. They found it, and that alone is fatal to impartiality." "So what happens now?" LeBron asked, not defiantly, but like a man willing to carry what comes. "Now," the judge said, "we decide not what to do with you, but whether a new trial can even exist without the infection you left behind." That afternoon, in a meeting room on the 3rd floor, the Federal Review Board delivered their report. It was brutal in clarity. Jury integrity had been compromised beyond repair. 3 jurors confirmed external influence. 1 anonymous message confirmed intentional manipulation. Multiple communications from LeBron's team showed a pattern of observational pressure. And the timing of every interaction aligned with key shifts in the jury's leaning. The recommendation was unanimous: mistrial. The judge read the decision aloud in the courtroom the next morning, voice measured but mournful. "Due to the accumulation of extrajudicial influence upon the jury, including but not limited to the conduct of Mr. LeBron James, the court has no choice but to declare this trial compromised. As such, all charges remain open, but proceedings are officially suspended, pending a full federal restart with a new jury, in a new venue, with conditions designed to prevent recurrence of such interference." Reporters outside delivered the ruling like an earthquake. Some called it a disgrace, others called it overdue, and some simply called it American. A nation built on the belief that law stands taller than fame had just watched that belief buckle. That evening, the NBA released an updated statement. "We take these developments seriously. We will continue to evaluate the situation. No individual is above institutional integrity." Sponsors paused their campaigns. Endorsements were quietly reassessed. But LeBron didn't respond. He issued no video, no statement, no apology. He returned to Ohio, where he stayed inside, out of sight. Not because of guilt, because he understood that some falls don't need court rulings to be felt. Back in Los Angeles, the empty courtroom became a symbol. The wooden benches were polished, the gallery cordoned off. But 1 seat 2nd row, right side, was left untouched. Court officials placed a small plaque on it, not engraved in gold or brass, just a plain plastic strip. It read, "This seat must remain empty during federal proceedings. No explanation, no initials, just a reminder. A memorial not for a man, but for the moment everything changed." Diddy, now out on bail, walked through the courtroom one last time before being relocated to another venue for the retrial. He paused at the jury box. He stared at it. 12 chairs. None of them held redemption now. None of them remembered the testimony. They only remembered pressure. "They looked at him," he said softly to his attorney, who nodded without reply. "They stopped looking at me." Outside, a mural had already gone up on the wall across from the courthouse. It was spray-painted in blacks and silvers, the face of Lady Justice blindfolded but cracked. Her scales tilted, not by a hand, but by a shadow looming behind her. It wasn't LeBron's face. It wasn't Diddy's. It wasn't anyone's. Just a shadow. Because, in the end, it wasn't about a name. It was about a truth no one wanted to speak aloud, that sometimes justice doesn't need to be bought, threatened, or bribed. Sometimes it just needs to be watched. And when the wrong eyes watch it too closely, too powerfully, it folds. That's what the world saw. A courtroom that never had a chance to choose truth, because it never had a chance to be alone.